Hello and welcome to the Low Carb Leader podcast. I'm your host, Dan Perryman, and you have joined me for episode 97. So almost there at 100. All right, today I'm going to be talking about something that not a lot of people talk about, the top 10 downside of keto. So we always talk about how great keto is, but a lot of people experience problems with it, and we really never talk about that. So I'm going to cover those today. And you may be thinking, but Dan, you are the low carb leader. You have done keto for 10 years. I have. The problem is, though, a lot of us will do keto low carb most of the time, but we don't really talk about the times that we get off of it or that we do unintentional cheats, right? So, and especially a lot of us in the podcasting, social media world who talk about keto and low carb, we get off of it at times and we don't really talk about it. And we kind of forget some of the problems that we may have encountered. When people say, hey, this isn't working for me, then we usually say, you know what? It's probably keto flu. Just drink your pickle juice, right? We always say that. We're going to talk a little bit about the downsides today. All right. Now, if you enjoy this podcast or if you enjoy the videos, make sure you hit subscribe. I would love it if you left a review on iTunes. The more reviews we get, the better. And I'm at Daniel Perryman on YouTube, so you can check that out. And please hit subscribe. I'm happy to announce that I finally got over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So that's really exciting for me. All right. And you, as always, you can check out thelowcarbleader.com for all the podcasts, the show notes, transcripts. So check that out. All right, well, let's get to it. So I want to define, first of all, when I say keto or when I say low carb, because a lot of us use those two terms very interchangeably, but really they're not the same. So when I say keto, I'm talking about 5% carbs, 20% protein, and 75% fat. So that's the traditional type of keto eating, which is very, very high fat, as opposed to low carb, which you can actually have up to 150 grams of carbs and still be considered low carb, right? So paleo, there's a lot of paleo people who eat a lot of carbs, Mediterranean diet, but there's definitely a difference, right? So actually there's a huge difference. So it's kind of the difference between enjoying a diet of fruit, sweet potatoes, some desserts, other luxuries of a low carb way of eating versus keto, where you actually have to limit your green vegetables, right? Because you have to keep your carbs really, really low and you got to keep your ratios in line. So that being said, during this podcast, when I say keto, I'm going to be referring to specifically a ketogenic diet. And when I say low carb, I'm going to be referring to probably the more flexible type of eating with higher carbs. All right, now let's get started. Okay, the number one downside of both keto and low carb, and this is something, the reason I put it first is because this is something I experienced myself. My sleep sucked. My sleep was horrible. Every night I would wake up almost at 2:30 exactly. And, you know, I talked to clinicians and they thought maybe my blood sugar was low. And at that time, your body kind of wakes you up, right? When your blood sugar gets too low, it wakes you up as kind of an alarm system. But I would wake up every single night. And I know a lot of you suffer with sleep, and I tried a lot of things to get around this, but what I did find is that when I would eat a few carbs, I could get better sleep. And as I've said before in other podcasts, I followed it very, very strict. So, and I know I talked to a lot of you in the keto groups and you suffer from bad sleep too. So just keep that in mind, that staying low carb or ketogenic can affect your sleep, right? And the bad part there is sleep is so important. I was exhausted during the day. So if you're having sleep issues, there's a lot more around sleep, such as routines, calming yourself down, blue blockers, all that. And you can Google that and check that out. But just keep in mind that staying low carb can actually kind of affect your sleep in a negative way. All right, number 2 downside. This is something we talk about all the time, and it's the keto flu. What a lot of you don't think about, though, is this can actually be an endless negative cycle. Because when we traditionally think of keto flu, we always say, oh, you cut out carbs, and then for the first 7 to 10 days, life sucks, right? Make sure you suck on a pickle, make sure you get your electrolytes. But that's assuming that you are doing a ketogenic diet like exactly right? So in 10 days, you will switch from burning glucose to burning ketones. But the problem is not everybody does it right. So what happens, they can get in this really bad cycle of they go high fat, specifically keto, they go high fat for 3 or 4 days, and then they give up and then they do a cheat meal, right? And then they put sugar back into their system, and then they do it again and they do it again. And so your body never actually has a chance to transition fully to ketones. And the first 10 days is just the beginning. A lot of experts will say it actually takes 3 or 4 months to get completely switched over to burning ketones, right? 3 or 4 months. If you're starting off and then doing a cheat meal every weekend or every second weekend, you may never actually get where you're completely fat adapted. So you're going through this cycle of glucose, ketone, and your body doesn't know what to burn for energy. You stay in this kind of lethargic state where you don't feel good. And what a lot of people will say is, keto didn't work for me, when in fact, they probably never got into a state of ketosis. So that's something to watch for. But you can actually get in a very bad cycle. And something that has worked for me on both of these, sleep and the keto flu, is taking exogenous ketones. And I know a lot of you have taken them, a lot of you haven't taken them, but they actually fixed my sleep. And I think what happened was it gave my brain the fuel to sleep. And then while you're transitioning from glucose to ketones, especially like after you do a cheat meal, it takes a while to get back in ketosis. Exogenous ketones can actually provide the fuel. And in my mind, it's all about providing that fuel to your brain so you're not tired and so you can sleep well. So those, I kind of fixed my issues with exogenous ketones, and it's definitely worked for me. Okay, number 3, downside. It gives you a license to eat bad fat and take chemicals that are bad for you. And this is what I always hear. As soon as I say something about keto, somebody will say, oh, keto is like Atkins, right? You can eat bacon, right? Don't you just eat a bunch of protein, right? Well, not exactly. But when Atkins came out, that's what I had friends who were doing Atkins, and they just ate bacon and hamburger all the time. And that's technically, it can get you into ketosis, but it's not good for you. A lot of people will view keto and say, I'm ketogenic, but they look at it as a way to go to McDonald's and eat hamburgers minus the buns, which is nothing against McDonald's or fast food restaurants, but the quality of meat is pretty low. They'll drink diet sodas because technically there's 0 calories and 0 carbs. They'll eat fat bombs nonstop, right? And they'll look for ways to find artificial sweeteners and to replace the sugar, which is problematic in itself. And then they will find these low carb bars that are just full of chemicals, right? So instead of viewing this ketogenic journey as a way to become healthy, they want to pee on their urine strip and say, hey, I'm in ketosis. And they don't think about the actual health benefits that it's doing for your body. They just think that ketosis is the way, because a lot of people just want to lose weight. And you can lose weight, but you can lose weight in a very, very unhealthy way. All right, number 4, it's really difficult to sustain this, especially day to day and then socially. Luckily, I can eat the same foods over and over, and it doesn't really matter to me, right? but I hate avocados. And if people say just eat avocados, I don't like them. If avocados were my key to success, I would not be ketogenic, right? Because there's certain foods that I don't like, and there's certain foods that people don't like. There's a lot of you that need variety in your diet. And this is a very kind of boring way. A lot of people will say, you know what, there's a lot of good ways to make this food. And it's true, except you have to put the time in to make these dishes, right? Like, I don't really like to cook, and I don't like to go to the store and get all these ingredients. So to me, it's very simple. I eat nuts and meat and cheese, but I can tolerate that, right? But a lot of you can't. And so the first week is okay, but then it starts to get really boring for you. And then the holidays come around and social events come around, and it's really hard not to eat the piece of wedding cake. It's really hard not to eat the Christmas candies. It's really hard to pass up the pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving. Day to day and then socially is very difficult. And one of the issues there is that this can actually, eating this way and then cheating a lot you can lose weight, and then you rebound weight gain, and you go into this yo-yo dieting, which is really bad for you as well. All right, number 5, it can actually result in a high-fat, high-carb diet. And this, if you're going to pay attention to anything, pay attention to this, especially with ketogenic. People will start the keto diet and are like, hey, I get to eat all this fat. So they start off by eating a lot of bacon. They're adding MCT oil. They're doing their bulletproof coffee. They're adding coconut oil. They're eating butter, and they reduce their carbs. And then about 3 or 4 days go by, maybe a week goes by, maybe a couple weeks go by, and then they have a cheat meal. And then they start introducing pizza back into it and sweets back into it. And then they will say, oh, I got to get back on track. So then they go back to ketogenic diet. So they up their fat, MCT oils, coconut oil, butter. So you see the problem here. High fat, low carb, and then back to high fat, high carb, then back to high fat, low carb. So what you're doing, if you're doing this, is you're creating a very high fat, high carb diet. And that's exactly what we're trying to get away from here. But I see it all the time. So I think personally, this can be detrimental to your health, because you're eating a bunch of fat and then you're adding in a bunch of carbs, and a high fat, high carb diet is definitely not good for you. Okay, number 6, you can take a long time to regain performance as an athlete. So there's a book called The Art and Science of Low Carb Performance by Volek and Finney. And they do look at high performing athletes. So this isn't like traditional athletes or recreational athletes, but it does apply. And it can take 6 months to a year for high performing athletes to regain their performance when they switch from a high carb diet to a low carb diet. What they're finding, though, is that it actually does improve performance, and they can actually become better, but it takes a long time to transition. So I know a lot of weightlifters, especially just recreational athletes, runners, they want to do ketogenic, or they try it, and within the first week they feel horrible, right? Or first couple weeks, and they're like, my performance is down, I can't lift as much, I can't run as fast, I can't run as far, and then they give up. But what they need to realize is that it takes a long time. I think the benefits are there, but you have to give up performance in the short term. A lot of them won't do that, because, as you know, if you're eating carbs, it gives you a lot of short-term energy, as opposed to kind of the longer burning fuel that ketones give you. So from an athletic performance, they have to be really committed to doing the ketogenic diet. Okay, number 7, it can cause nutrient deficiency. And this happens a lot, because what happens is people switch to a ketogenic diet and they don't have a balanced approach. Naturally, when you go ketogenic, you eat less. your protein's going to be reduced, your carbs are going to be reduced. And one of the things that I read a lot about, hear a lot about, is my hair falls out. Everything I've read, this is more due to a protein deficiency. But when your calories get lowered and you're doing moderate protein, then your protein is going to get naturally lowered. Rather than taking an approach as a healthy lifestyle, people get caught up in more fat, they don't get enough protein, they don't get their green vegetables in, and this can actually cause nutrient deficiency. It can also change your bowel movements where you can get diarrhea or get constipated. So you really have to pay attention to that. That's why a well-balanced ketogenic diet is best. Number 8, downside, it can cause binge eating and food obsession with some people. So if you're inclined to do this type of binge eating, or if you have an issue with it, you definitely need to work with your doctor before you switch to something like this. And I recently talked to somebody that actually was doing great and ate some chocolate and kind of got obsessed with eating chocolate, and actually told me that some days that's all she will eat. And so we have to be really careful about that, because the variety is very much narrowed in ketogenic world, right? Low carb, you get a little bit more. So if you have a problem, if you have an issue that may result in that, then please work with your clinician, your counselor, whatever, before you switch into this type of diet, because that can be an issue. Number 9 downside, for type 1 and type 2 diabetics, the research shows that it's actually very beneficial for type 2s, but you need to be very careful, because changing your diet will change your blood sugar levels, and that could affect your medications. I think type 1 diabetics are more in tune to it because it's always been an issue with them, or it's been an issue with them for a long time. But type 2, a lot of type 2 diabetics or pre-diabetics are just discovering how to deal with their diabetes. And so switching food around, they probably don't think through it so much. But I highly recommend that you work with a clinician if you're diabetic before you start switching this up, because somebody has to be monitoring your medicines. Okay, and lastly, number 10, the long-term effects really aren't known, because even though ketogenic's been around since the 20s with epilepsy, it's kind of becoming, more mainstream. It started off as a very narrow type of treatment for a clinical condition, and now more and more people are doing it with different health conditions, different metabolisms, everything. So I don't believe that there's long-term studies yet. So that's the top 10. So there you have it. And the reason I wanted to share this is because I become too subjective, right? So I'm not objective when it comes to this, because I really believe in keto. I really believe in low carb. And sometimes I think that we don't pay attention to some of the negative issues that are associated with the diet, because we want to sell it and promote it so much to other people because we think it's great for us. But I think it's really important that we objectively look at the pros and the cons of the type of diet. And sometimes staying low carb for too long isn't the best. Carb cycling works for other people. I know when I introduce carbs back in, as long as I do it in a healthy way, I usually feel better. So I don't know if staying ketogenic all the time is best for me. So I just wanted to share that. You need to find out what works best for you. All right. So I hope I didn't scare anybody away from the low carb ketogenic, world, because there's a lot of benefits to it. And if you want to check out all the podcasts that I have on the Low Carb Leader, you can check that out, because I've talked to a lot of researchers that talk about the benefits of it. And again, if you're enjoying this podcast, please go to iTunes and hit subscribe. I would love it if you left me a review. And I'm trying to put more and more on YouTube. It's under Daniel Perryman, and please subscribe there. I'm going to start putting the videos out a lot more. And you can find all the show notes and the links and everything else at thelowcarbleader.com. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I would love to hear your comments, your questions. You can message me on Facebook. You can leave them on the website. You can put them in the comments, whatever you want to do. All right, everybody. So that was the top 10 downsides of keto, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Everybody have a great week and keep on eating healthy.